I'm tired of having to re-emphasize where we've been, but I know many of you got so much stuff on your mind you may need to hear it again, but just real quickly, we've been talking about the subject of Christ versus religion for the last 5 weeks. And then our emphasis has been one word, ignite. Now we're pulling all of this from the story where Abraham, everywhere he went, what was essential to his life, as it would be for anybody, was water. So every place, because you know that God said, I'm going to send you to a land you do not know anything about, and he had to have water all the way about getting there. So every place he stopped, he had to dig a well to get water. And he was good at it. He had the favor of God on him. And he never, ever did not have water. Now we look at the New Testament, we find out that that water represents life. Jesus said, out of your belly shall flow life, rivers out of your innermost being. And so that water speaks of life, speaks of Christ that's in us. So now Isaac grows up to become an adult. Abraham's gone. And he is forced out of particular land. So he has to now become, like his dad, a wanderer. And what's essential to life is water. So he says, I'm going to go back and find those wells that my father, Abraham, dug up when I was a kid. And so when he goes back, he finds out that all the wells that Abraham dug, the enemy, the Philistines, had clogged them up with every kind of waste, garbage imaginable. So he can't get to the water. So what he has to do is he has to get in there and pull out all that garbage, all that waste, human waste, and everything they can think of, and pull that out to get to that water. Now, that's the picture that Genesis gives us. And I think that's where we are today. Why do I use the word ignite? Is because, if anything, we barely have a spark. When John the Baptist says, the Bible says that he was considered a bright and shining lamp, on fire for God. Then we've got the parable of the 10 virgins who had their lamps burning bright, full of oil, for when the bridegroom came. So, looking at all of that, we're finding that maybe that all that garbage, and it can include sin, but sin is a result of only one thing: law. Law produces sin. 1 Corinthians 15 says the power of sin is the law. I'm going to get into this here shortly, but I want to take my time with this introduction, because today's going to be a huge day in beginning something. And so what I want you to see and understand is that law is what produces the sin that's already there. Let me back up. Paul called law a tutor, a schoolmaster. Obviously, people don't know they're sinners before they meet Christ, before they're awakened to who they are in Christ. They obviously don't know how bad of a sinner they are. So God gives them the law to show them that that sin in them, it only gets magnified. So, well, let me just do this, because let me take my time with this. You'll see here in a minute. So, when you have the two trees, you guys are going to know this better than anybody. As many times we've done this. Tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. I'm going to tell you that the law comes from that tree. After they ate from that tree. Because it's good and evil. God says, don't eat from this tree, because I just want you to be. I've created you complete, Adam and Eve. You don't need anything. All I need you to do is eat from all the trees in the garden. That's all. Don't come over here and get tied up into what to do and what not to do. You already are. So when they come over here and eat from this tree, God says, now you can no longer eat from this tree. You've fallen from grace. You're now apart from me. You're in separation mode. And now all you're going to live by default now, is this tree. So when Moses comes along in Exodus, God says, you guys don't understand that what eating from this tree produced sin. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So you don't know how apart you are from me. You still think there's a self-righteous, there's something you can do, something that you can be by eating from this tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 10 commandments of what to do and what not to do, to show you how much of a sinner you are and how apart from me that you are, and that apart from me in your sin, you can do nothing but be apart from me. So the law comes from this tree. Where's he going to come up with the do's and don'ts? Where does the do's and don'ts come from? Where does good come from? Where does evil come from? The understanding of it, the knowledge of it is from this tree. So he gives them the law to show them. Now let me tell you something. Anytime anybody wants to engage the law, they go right back into this system. Even though they're saved, they come back over here, and if you engage the law in any way, shape, or form, you are confessing your apartness, and you'll go right back into sin. Law is designed to produce or magnify the sin. So your only salvation is in Christ, the tree of life. Now, let me give you something that will help you understand law. What is law? Now, we know we could say the 10 Commandments, and we could say the 600 extra rules and regulations they've come up with in the Old Testament. But law can be derived from a culture. Like they're trying to change our culture today with all the crazy going on and trying to make you abide by their new rules. But that's law for them. Because if you want to be part of us, see, the woke culture has its own righteousness. You want to be right with us? Do this new stuff. Don't say these terms. Start saying these terms. Start believing this way. Because this is the woke righteousness. And when you don't abide in the new righteousness, which is derived from their new rules and regulations, you are now canceled, means you've fallen from their grace. So culture can have its own right. Prisons have their righteousness. Right? So law is anything that anybody or anyone puts a requirement on you. It's a requirement. Law's a requirement. So now I want you to see in the next several weeks, I want you to see law, no matter what culture or phase or era we live in, law is really religion. That's what law is. Because when you get to Paul, the new covenant, he's anti-law. He says it's not that Christ is the end of the law. He fulfilled it, removed it. Now he fulfills all the requirements of God in Christ, who's in you, working that out. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I want you to see that law is religion. And so what we're going to focus on, and religion produces sin, by the way. This is not debatable. You can say, well, that's your opinion. It's not my opinion. Law produces sin. Just like a mirror exposes all what you really look like, but can't offer any help to change the pimples and the zits or the dirt on you. It can't do anything for you. All it can do is show you the sin that's there. All right? So law amplifies. It even makes it worse. Because Paul says the power of sin is the law. Yeah. So this is not debatable. So what I want to show you is that garbage in the well is religion. That is the only thing. I cannot think of it. It's not sin. Because sin is a result of being apart from Him. And if you're going to try to gap the bridge of apartness with law, it only makes you more apart. So religion comes along and gives you more rules. More laws that keep you more apart from Him. You can't get to the water because they keep giving you more things to do. But I want to also show you, we're going to go for the jugular in the next several weeks, is we all are going to have to do work on our own wells. Not performance, but by revelation, God shows us the stuff there and the Spirit takes it out. Once He shows it to you, He'll take it out if you amen it. Well, but I think you're going to amen it, because I've never ever seen a time in my life that God pointed something out and I argued with him over it. Especially if it has to do with religion or sin. I mean, where do I... Now, if he says, I want you to go do this, I'm like, well, I don't understand why you... I may fight him on something I don't understand, but we all understand sin. We all understand law. The law of sin and death. We all understand that. So that's my introduction. Now here's my other introduction. Introduction number 2. So what does that launch us off into starting today? I've drugged my feet on this simply because I haven't had the release of the Spirit to do so. And I know once this, I can even back out now and say, forget it, let's get into the message. Because I'm like, God, once I make this statement, I have to commit to this thing. This is going to be a hard several months ahead for me, not you, for me. And that is to return for the second time to do semi-verse by verse of the book of Galatians. Because I'm seeing this, that garbage is gotten there by religion in the well. And the only way to get to the true water is to remove the religion that people have come in and put on us. And why it matters to me more, and I did a verse by verse in 2006, which brings me to this point. I'm going to go, because you can't find my verse by verse. I've got like 52 messages on the book of Galatians, maybe more. That they're half an hour apiece that I did on the radio in 2006. And they're good, but what we're going to do is a lot better. But I'm going to start putting them on the radio starting tomorrow morning, maybe 3 a week. I want to do 5. I know you guys... there's guys I watch, they just give me so much content, I can't keep up with them. I mean, I know one guy does a morning and evening. Give me a break. Who has the time to sit there? It's hard enough to keep up with people once a week. So I'm not going to overload you, but they're only half an hour, and I'm going to do 3 a week, so you can do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, however you want to break them up. They're only half an hour, maybe even less than a half an hour, once I take all the stupid garbage out of it, like music and ads and stuff like that, and just make it teaching. But nevertheless, it'll be about 20 minutes, 25 at the most. And so, and it's going to be however long it takes to get through the 52 or 60, however many messages there are. So that way, because there's things I do in that that's very academic, it gives you a lot of history, which I may not do in this series. I don't know. Let's see how the Spirit rolls with this. But, so starting tomorrow mornings, we'll put up 3 on, and I'm taking everything else off. So there'll only be 3 things on the playlist on that radio. And it'll be on Facebook, so you can access it. But you probably may have to get the app, SoundCloud, or maybe you can just, I can't remember how that pulls it up, but you can figure that out. Anyway, so we're going to do that. And then Thursdays and Sundays, we're going to plow through that book. I promise you, I totally promise you, and if I'm wrong, you tell me I'm wrong, but I promise you, you will be changed. Martin Luther made this statement. Now, this is the guy who created the Reformation, who started it, or at least others started it really, but he really was the one who brought it to fruition. But he makes this statement, I'm married to the book of Galatians. He said, yeah. No, you got to stop him. He's married to it. This book is what the Reformation was all about. As a monk, he gets married later on in life, breaking from the Catholic Church who said you couldn't get married. He gets married to a lady named Catherine, and he named the book of Galatians after her because he's married to it. Now, you sit there and but think about a man, he doesn't just mince his words. This impacted him to the core, that he would be married to it. But let me tell you what else he says. That he has to read the book of Galatians every 6 months to stay free. I'll let that sink in. You think, well, he knew. Let me tell you, that would be the same case with the Apostle Paul. He would have to renew his mind on this message a lot in order to stay free. Wonder why? Once I understood math, 1 plus 1 equals 2. You think I'm going to go home and study math to keep my addition? Once you know certain things, once you ride a bike, well, they say you never forget it. And that's the truth. You never forget how to ride a bike. So there's certain things we do in the natural, I never have to go back and practice and work on it again. However, this you will, and I'll show you why. All right? So all the introductions aside, you got your outline there. Go to, and I don't have anything on the screen purposely, because everything we're talking about today is out of the book of Galatians. I want you to see the thread. There's 6 chapters there. We're going to bounce. We're not going to go to the verse by verse yet. We may lay a groundwork for 2 months before I even get to verse 1. I'm just telling you, this is deep, and it's worth getting into, and you'll see why. So go to Galatians chapter 1. Give me a second to get there. Galatians chapter 1. Now, let's look at verses 6 through 9. Now, Paul is the one who found the church of Galatia. He's their spiritual father. He makes this statement to them, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him, Christ, who called you in the grace of... So let's look at this. There's a problem here. What he preached was the real gospel. Right? So he says there's a problem. This is gospel. This is what he preached. He preached Christ, the life of God. Tree of life. He says, but you have been soon removed. Something came over here and pulled you over here to a different gospel. It comes from this tree right here. Okay? Now watch. He says, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. So now we've got a perversion of his message. A perversion that's happening, that's going on. Taking the real gospel, doing something with it, whatever it is, and then perverting it. So in other words, if I do anything to this gospel, there's only one thing I can do with this gospel. Preach it. But if I do anything other to it than as it is, by adding to it or taking away, he says you're perverting the message. I'm not saying it's right here. So he says, so if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. Verse 9, as we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be, and the Greek word is anathema. Let him be damned by God. That's strong words. Let him be cursed by God if he takes this gospel and twists it, adds to it, manipulates it, whatever. If it doesn't come out the way Jesus gave it through the Holy Spirit, it's perverted, and if a man attempts to preach this gospel, he better do it right, because if he doesn't do it right, he's perverting it. And Paul said, let him be damned by God as he stands in that pulpit giving you something that's perverted. Now, how do you pervert water? What do you add to it?
Dirt.
What did they do with the wells? They perverted the water in the wells with all that gunk. See, we don't take this message seriously, and I've always said this, because I got to tell you right now, 90+% of what you're hearing out there, and especially on TV, is a perverted gospel. But no one will stand up with the spirit of Paul, the spirit of Galatians, and say so. And we're letting all this stuff come, and we adhere to it, and it sounds good. Well, sure it does. That tree's good. Well, it makes sense. Well, it should. It's the knowledge of that good that makes sense. And we grab it, we ingest it, we digest it, not knowing that it's keeping us from the real Christ, the true message, real grace that's there for us to flow in. So it's really, understand this, could he got water out of that well with that garbage?
No. Maybe at the end.
I don't, today you can just stick something down in there and a sump pump and pull it up, right? Go beyond it, get that, and as you're pulling it, and that's what we're doing. We're drinking from religion. And we look at our marriages, we look at our lives, we look at we still got the same addiction we've had for 20 plus years. I still got the anger problem I had when I got born again 40 years ago. I'm still the jerk. What's happening? Well, you're feeding off of old, ugly water that's been contaminated by this tree. This is why he kicked them out of the garden. You are not going to eat from this tree and come over here and eat from this tree and mix these two covenants together. This is the new covenant. This is the old covenant. I'll prove that to you why those are the two covenants when we get to Galatians chapter 4. Nevertheless, this is what he says. Let him be accursed. Now, I want to show you something else. Go to chapter 2. What I'm doing, thread Galatians together with you. We're not doing it, I'm just going to thread it together. Okay, you know how I do this. Remember I said, I don't know, I grew up in Fairmont. And I learned the streets. But when I was in a plane and I came over, I was shocked to see how close-knitted and like, oh my God, right? You just don't, it's a different viewpoint seeing something from the top than always just being in it. Does that make sense? And, well, how many have seen pictures of the Earth from space? You would have never known that, what that Earth looked like. You know what it looks like here. And it's a whole different perception in it than seeing it from there. So what I want to do is show you the bird's eye view of Galatians before we dive in and go through all the different side roads, streets, and dead ends and everything that's there. Does that make sense? Now go to chapter 2. Now look at verse 11. Now we hit this the other day, but again, not from this angle. Verse 11. Now when Peter had come to Antioch, this is not Galatians. This is Paul talking to Galatians about when Antioch was not his church. Paul did not find Antioch. He found Galatians. He wasn't the spiritual father of Antioch, because Antioch ends up, if you look at history, he loses Antioch to the Judaizers eventually. But what I want you to see is in chapter 2, he's at Antioch with Barnabas, ministering to the people in Antioch, and he's telling the Galatians about it. All right. So this is in Antioch. When Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James who would eat with the Gentiles, but when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision, and the rest of the Jews who also played hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel. So what he's saying is, take chapter 2, put it with chapter 1, these perverts came into Antioch. And Peter got caught up in the perversion. Barnabas got caught up with the perversion, because I'm going to prove to you the perversion is still in Jerusalem, because these men who are connected with James is promoting a different gospel. Otherwise, why get in Peter's face? Otherwise, why have a council at Acts chapter 15? We're going to get into all of this. This is why it's going to take a long time. But I promise you, you will know the gospel better than most people. Okay, now watch. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them, if you being a Jew live like the manner of Gentiles, and not as Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? Now, we'll get into that here in a minute. Or maybe not. But what I want you to see is, chapter 1, he says, if anybody comes preaching a different gospel. Chapter 2, he shows you those people preaching a different gospel and how he has to get in their face and call them hypocrites. Does that make sense? Now, you say, well, does that mean Peter and James and the rest of the gang, God is damning them? No, because I've showed you that there's two different things. These people were accepting Christ, but then adding the law to Christ. And Paul says you don't add anything to Christ. These are saved people who have been compromised by a different gospel. And they're peddling that. And he's going to correct them. If they don't get corrected and they keep peddling that kind of a gospel, then they will be damned. You got to give people room. This was a transition between the old covenant and the new covenant, and God's given them a 40-year year of transition. So Peter transitions out of it. Now, Peter would have said, "Screw you, Paul. I'm going to go back and preach the law." Well, then the law will be your condemner. The law will be your judge, Peter. You'll be damned by the law that God set up to damn you in the first place. So they'll be damned by the very message they preach. But Jesus comes to deliver them from the curse of the law, so they're not going to be damned. Is this making sense? We'll develop all this. I'm just trying to pull it together. So here's where I want to go with this. So and I've quoted this for years, but God brought it back. If Luther had to read the book of Galatians every 6 months to stay free, why am I any different? Why are you any different? And I got to be honest with you. We're all on journeys, are we not? And one of the things I've been saying, we haven't looked at it, but I keep saying it, is in Deuteronomy, he says, you've been at this mountain long enough. It's time to move on. Meaning that your present revelation of Christ, it's good, but there's more. And it's time to move on. If you don't, then you'll start falling backwards. Because the Spirit wants to lead you into more of who Christ is, and then experience that. But if we stay, because a lot of what we still have is religion. I may have a lot of Christ, but I may have a lot of religion. He wants to move me on to the next phase of unveiling Christ. And I can't stay and camp out with my past religious experiences or my belief system. That's why you're always moving out of religion into Christ. This is why you hear the terms from faith to faith, from grace to grace, from glory to glory. It's not that we're getting more of Jesus, we're getting more of Jesus unveiled to us that's there. In other words, we're getting rid of more garbage so the water becomes more what?
Clear.
Pure. Yeah. Okay? Is this making sense? Now look at chapter 2. We're there. Look at the first 5 verses. Afterward, 14 years later, I went up again, this is Paul saying, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and also took Titus with me. And I went up by revelation and communicated to them the gospel which I preach among the Gentiles. So the gospel that's being preached to the Jews is different from the gospel that's being preached to the Gentiles. What you have here is 2 gospels being preached. Otherwise, Paul would never have to make that trek to Jerusalem. They were criticizing his message. And they were going to Paul saying, hey, what they're preaching in Jerusalem is not the same thing you're preaching to us here in Galatia or Antioch. So Paul says, okay, we've got to all get on the same page, right? We're not going to divide Christ. We're not going to divide the church. We leaders have got to get on the same page. Look what he says. So I privately went among those who were of reputation, pillars. Why? I'm not going to go to some janitor. I'm going to go to the senior pastor. I'm not going to go to the church and talk to the janitor. What influence does he have over the body? I'm going to go to the pillars, those of reputation, also known as the disciples, James and Peter especially. That by any means I might run or had run in vain, meaning taking the trip in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage, religion. Put religion there, because religion is bondage. That they might bring us into religion. Back into religion that Jesus set us free from. Judaism is religion. It was good for the time because it brought Christ. But once it came, you die to that. The law, Romans 7, I'm dead to the law, means I'm dead to Judaism. I'm dead to any ism. When Christianity becomes a religion, we're going to be dead to that as well. Does that make sense? Now what I'm talking, now watch where this goes. And this is why I'm doing this. Because if Luther had to read the book of Galatians every 6 months to stay free. Now let me ask you this question. If you're not free, or if you were free at one time, and these guys come into your house by way of media, or by friendship, or even by me, as you're a pastor, if we come in and we preach another gospel, there's only one thing that message is going to do: put you in bondage. And you can't be free if you're in bondage. Chapter 5 in Galatians, you'll say in verse 1, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Why do I have to be free? Because if I'm not free, then I'm still in bondage. You're either free or you're in bondage. This tree sets you free. This tree puts you in bondage. This tree is all about Christ. This tree is all about religion, law, any law. This includes your infamous steps, secrets, and keys. But you know that. You ought to know that by now. So here's where I'm at. When I said we were at this mountain long enough, this is what God said to me. This might shock you. And I'm being very transparent. I hate that I have to be transparent, because it's how I am. But when he says you're at this mountain long enough, he has been doing this over the past several years. But only in reference to, okay, you went to this guy or this ministry or this teacher and you learned as much as you can, move on. That's how it's always been with me. And what have I always said, not recently, but years ago I always said, get in, get what you can, and then get out. Because they have a compromised message somewhere. We all do. We all do. So if you stay too long, you start picking up religion. I'm telling you, ain't a pastor out there. If I sit down long enough, I'll show you where he's being religious, including me. Okay? Every 6 months in order to stay free. If you're not up on Galatians and keeping that as the mainstay and feeding off of that, well, you're going to automatically go into bondage and not even know it. Because you'll say, well, it's good. It makes sense. You have a knowledge of good. Forget evil. We know what evil is. Okay? All you have is a knowledge of good. All the church peddles today is a knowledge of what's good, therefore go do it. Putting the requirement of obedience and performance on you. Not on the Christ who's in you. Go back to the vicarious, which we'll go back to the vicarious Jesus in this message, in this series as well. So this time, he's not leading me on, you've been at this mountain long enough. I stayed too long. Certain ministries I stayed too long because I was loving the knowledge of good. I loved it. I loved it. Because some of this, history, all this stuff is good, but it can become bad. History can become bad. If you camp out and make it too much, you can become the greatest historian, but if you do it apart from Christ, what good is the history? It's his story. HIS/story, not history. If you don't see him in the history, then it's both. It's worthless. Why know it? What's it going to do for you? Feed your knowledge, puff you up. That's what knowledge does. So when he's saying this to me, and I didn't know this was happening, and this is like the frog in the kettle. You get comfortable where you're at, and then you realize something's happening to me, and it ain't good. You felt my pain in the last several weeks of I ain't staying at this mountain anymore. Remember me saying that? I'm moving on. I'm done. All that. So what has happened is what happened to me is what happened to Paul and the people at Antioch. And is happening to the Galatians. The same thing that happened to Antioch is happening to the Galatians, except this time, Paul's ticked. Now you're messing with my kids. I found this church in Galatia. That's why he's strong. That you read any theologian, they'll tell you this is not a regular letter of Paul. Paul starts his letter, blessed are you, grace be unto you, and on and on and on. But this letter has that, but he right in verse 6, I can't believe you. It's in other words saying, I marvel at you. I cannot believe. And he says, who's bewitched you? You go through here, he's being tough. Because now they're hitting his kids. These guys have come in. Now what's happening? I said, Lord, if this can happen to me, because I wasn't reading the book of Galatians every 6 months. I was so enthralled by all the new that these guys are peddling of the knowledge of good. That every time you get the knowledge of good, you get the law. Because they're always going to require you to do something. Even if it's hidden and it's counterfeit, you can't. Counterfeit's a counterfeit. That's why Satan's an angel of light. He can deceive through counterfeit. And you're sitting there thinking it's good, and you're sitting there in that frog, and it's warm, it's good. There's some truth there, there's some Jesus there, and then if you keep staying there long enough, now you're going into their religious, their peripheral. They're not keeping it Christ-centered. I'm going to tell you something right now. Now I may be all over the place, but this is introduction. I'm going to tell you right now, it is almost impossible to keep Christ-centered in messages because of the peripheral. They always want to come over here and play with something over here, which is a distraction to the Christ that's in you. You don't think these faith teachers have distracted the church away from Christ with prosperity and success? You don't think the end time preachers have distracted people from being Christ-centered by all they talk about is the Antichrist, the false prophet, the beast, and 7 years tribulation? People are so inundated with that, they don't know anything about Jesus, but they know about the Antichrist. They know about the mark of the beast. They're so inundated with it, they actually thought many think the vaccine is the mark of the beast. You become so obsessed with something, you lose your bearings of really what reality is. Christ is reality. He's the truth. And the Greek truth is reality. So when you get off-centered, and something that Paris guy we were talking about made a statement, you don't know, it doesn't matter, but he says what's happening is they think they're doing good by going off into the peripheral and doing all these add-ons, but what's happened is we have phased Christ out. It's all about motivation. It's all about performance. So I'm sitting here in the last several weeks, maybe 3 months, and I'm like, where is the life? The books I bought, the seminars, the Zoom meetings I've attended, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, something's wrong. And the one guy, man, I'm already out of time. Am I really? Has we been here that long? Wow. The one guy that I've been plugged into for a while makes the statement, I really don't know about Paul. I laugh and I have a problem with Paul. But, not that he was writing Paul off. That should have been an indicator to me. That should have been an indicator to me. And I'm a little mad, not real bad, but I'm a little disappointed in myself. But how do if a person's saying they're having a problem with Paul, they don't have a pure gospel. Paul was the one who made the gospel pure. It wasn't James. It wasn't Peter. It wasn't Jerusalem. He was knocking heads with Jerusalem. How is it, one question, how is it that James can pastor the church in Jerusalem for 19 years and not create one riot? Paul comes in and he's thrown in jail. Twice. At one time they had to lay him over the wall because they wanted to kill him. They never ever wanted to. But do you understand something? They finally got to James. When we get to the history of James, you're going to understand James was trying to play both sides, being the peacemaker. Because they said, James is very religious. James still holds on to James, in his own words in Acts, tells them, we're going to make the Jews keep doing the law, but Paul, you can go to the Gentiles, and they don't have to do the law. They were still, you're telling me that God didn't deliver the Jews from the law? He was still putting the law on Jews, and then had 5 kosher rules that they compromised on. You get this in Acts, I think it's Acts 15, the council in Jerusalem. And he gave them 5 kosher rules to do for the Gentiles. But you never hear Paul ever preaching those 5 rules. You don't have us. Are we Gentiles? Yeah. We're not Jews. And you're never going to find anybody preaching those 5 kosher rules, no matter how far back, even if you go back to Athanasius, you're not going to hear that. Because that was a dud meeting. And all Paul was concerned mostly was with the circumcision. And he didn't put the 5 rules on them. But James, and by the way, you know what those 5 rules are? If you were a Gentile in the Old Testament, and you wanted to be part of Israel, and there were certain things you had to do to be able to be part of them. Now, you wouldn't be able to do everything that they did, but you would be able to live among them, and it was those 5 kosher rules. You find that in Leviticus. Those 5. So James was saying, they're still dirty, they're still not chosen, we're the good ones, we're the pure ones, the Gentiles are still dirty, they're still not chosen, but if they do those 5 rules, we'll let them mix in among us. But they'll never be, we're the elites, not them. See, this is what you don't hear preached, and it messes everything up when you don't hear this thing preached right. And we're going to do that. That's why it's going to take a long time to get through this, so that you understand not only the history of what Paul had to fight against, but what you will now say, well, my God, I'm fighting almost the same thing, but in a different way. So all I'm saying, I'm going to close with this. I'm not even going to get to this. We'll have to finish this next week. But what I'm saying is, if I could sit there, and if Luther had to read the book of Galatians every 6 months to stay free, and me who have went through verse by verse and have really this has been probably the most book I've read from and preached from, and sit there and be deceived again into religion. And here's what I want to emphasize. I felt it. I didn't have the head knowledge of it, but my spirit was saying, you're dying, dude. There ain't no life in what you're listening to. There is no life in what you're reading, because it's not Christ-centered. Although talk about Christ, let me tell you, you know what? I wish I had a year with you, and no one's going to leave this room for 1 year. Don't think I couldn't do it. I mean, I'd have to sleep and eat, but I could go on till midnight tonight, and that's the truth. Let me just tell you this, and you're going to get all this. Again, this is just broad stroking something together here. We'll get the detail of it later. If you don't hear the word faith, promise, grace, and of course Christ, if these are not the ingredients to gospel, it's over. Walk away. It may sound good. The knowledge of the good will thrill you. And I've just been simply entertained by the knowledge of good. Because they talk about Christ. This is the deception. They'll voice the name, but they'll never maintain faith according to promise to experience the grace of God. Romans 5:2, that we access this grace by what? Faith. So I can't get to grace without faith. And faith has absolutely, and here's the other word you're going to hear, works. Something for you to do. It won't be promise. It'll be steps, secrets, keys. And it won't be by grace, because it'll be by your fleshly effort and willpower. Power of the will. Paul calls it Colossians will worship. That's where we're at. That's where we're at. And when you mix them together, it's even worse. It's just even worse. You know, I'm not a good cook. I come up with some good stuff every now and then, but when you get into soups, the thing's either going to be bland, or there's going to be so much in it, I can't. Have you ever tasted something that's either way too salty, or way too much garlic, and it ruins it? Does it not ruin it? Honestly, would you rather have the bland or all that seasoning that's way too much? Personally, I'd rather have the bland. If it's too salty, I can do bland. I can't do too salty. And when you do this, you have added a whole other set of ingredients to that soup. You know, keeping the analogy, I can't partake of it now. You can even say the words faith, grace, and promise, but if they're combined with works, steps, secrets, keys, and requirements, putting something on you to do, you're going to start dying. You're going to start feeling it. Because the main message of the new covenant is, the just shall live by faith. That has absolutely nothing to do with works. Works come out of it, but like the tree, the branch does not focus on the end of itself called fruit's not even there yet. It focuses on the root. And it never looks back to see, is there fruit? No, it's just so connected to the root, the fruit's already growing. And this is the charge that Luther and the Reformation got from the Catholic Church. They're anti-works. Well, you might as well say they're anti-fruit. There's no way we're anti-fruit. John 15 is all about fruit. It's how to get the fruit that's the debate. It's how to work that's the debate. If he says to rest, how do I rest and work at the same time? Because true work comes out of true rest. I won't be burned out. I'll be working out of the grace of God. I'll be working out of the life of God. The fruit, everything is His, not mine. So I want you to see that even after we get done with however long it takes, you still can't say, I got it. I know the book of Galatians. Don't go there. Don't get puffed up thinking, hey, we spent a whole year on the book of Galatians. We know this better than anybody else. Okay, wait a few months. Why? Because people are going to come into your life by stealth, and that's a key word. It's not probably in your translation, but it's in the New King James, and it is the best word to use. Because what's it mean to come in by stealth? Can't see it. It's like, I didn't see that thing coming. That's what happened to me. They came in through social media, through what I was engaged. They came in by stealth. And I was dying. My spirit was like, there's no, and all I kept saying, there's life missing here. But I wasn't, maybe all God, but He's teaching me something. But they kept coming with the knowledge of good, and I was learning. But there was no Christ in the learning. Because when you get knowledge, I'm sorry, I don't care how good it is, but when you get knowledge, it will always come over here, and you will want to do something to perform that knowledge you're getting. And there's no Christ. That's no Christology in that. I'd rather be stupid and eat from this tree. And that's why it's called the simplicity of Christ. And that's why I said, if a moron can't get this, then God has excluded the morons from understanding Christ. And how do you not, a moron can understand the way this thing works, a moron can get it. But we come over here to this tree, and we complicate the hell out of it. And we fall from grace. And again, that's Galatians chapter 5. How do you fall from grace? Leave this tree, come over here, and you're no longer going by faith, promise, and grace, which is all about Christ. You come over here and get back into works, steps, secret, keys, flesh. That's that garbage. See, when I said my spirit was dying, the garbage was keeping me from the light that was coming out. Oh, I was getting knowledge. I was growing in knowledge. But I wasn't growing in Christ, because that was keeping me. And these academics, and I'm not against academics, but the academics need to understand it's so easy to be deceived by knowledge, the good of knowledge, if you don't keep Christ as the center. And I'm going to tell you something, good luck with that. I don't see how you would do it. And this is why they all fell in it. All of them. If you're an academic, and I'm not against, I'm saying you will have a harder time juggling this than the person who's not academic. It's almost like, Lord, I would rather not be academic, because I don't think I can juggle this, because I haven't seen one do it yet. Because the ones I do watch and do it, I don't see this being the thing that they keep pumping. They're pumping this more than this. And you can see the anger in them. You can see the flesh come out. You can see things. You're like, so you can do it. I'm not saying it can't be done. The only way you can be academic and keep your spirituality or whatever, keep Christ at the center. They don't like the word spirituality. But keep Christ centered is to read the book of Galatians every 6 months. And I mean read it. Read it. Meditate on it. Don't just read it like you read it. You got to read it and meditate. You got to stop. You know, I stopped and meditated when God brought back to my memory that Luther read the book of Galatians every 6 months to stay free. I had to meditate on that quote. What a man, every 6 months to stay free. And I sat there yesterday and just sat there and meditated on what's it mean to be free. That I would have to read the book of Galatians and keep it before me all the time. Not every day, all the time. That's renewing the mind on the finished work. And Galatians is the defense of the gospel that he wrote the gospel about in Romans. You know why Hebrews had to be written? No one defended the Hebrews with the message of Galatians. They gave Romans, but they got tempted to go back to Judaism, and no one was there like Paul to say no. And so whoever wrote the book of Hebrews had to warn them, you go back to the law. The guy who wrote Hebrews is not waxing eloquent with Galatians. All he's waxing eloquent in is keeping it Christ-centered, and the warning, if you go back, you insult the grace of Christ. And you trample again the blood of Christ, because you're saying that his sacrifice isn't enough. I need steps, secrets, and keys. This is why the just shall live by faith. Faith in what Christ did, who he is in me, and which means faith has nothing to do with steps, secrets, and keys. If you're in steps, secrets, and keys, you are not in faith, and it's got nothing to do with promise. Because the opposite of promise is law. If kids, how old is Lainey back there? I guarantee she knows this. The difference between something required of her and something promised to her. So Randy leaves and she says, can you get me a toy from Walmart? Now she has two options, to say yes or no. Now she can add to yes by saying yes, but clean your room before I get back. And if your room is clean, I'll give you the toy. But if the room isn't clean, then I'm keeping it. So now there's a requirement. It's not a promise, is it? Kids know the difference between law and promise. Now if she says, yes, I'll get you that toy, and she waits and there's no stipulation, there's no requirement, it's pure grace. And then the kid comes back, promise? Yes, I promise I'll give you that toy. Reality is, I remember when I was in the first grade, I'm going to close with this. I got mad at my sister. I was in the first grade. I just got a drum set. Not kind of drum set he got from me, but I got a cheap little drum set, football, some things, you know. Now my dad ain't here and he could vouch for this. We lived on West Side here. First grade, she ticked me off. I grabbed the pillow, threw it at her. She ducked. It hit the lamp, and guess what happened? The lamp broke. Oh, you're in trouble now. So then my mom and dad gets home. My mom was the disciplinarian, and she always went overboard. It was just right after Christmas. They boxed everything they got me for Christmas into a box, stuck it in the attic. I don't know how long. That's not fair. In reality, that is not fair. Those gifts were grace. You never said to me, now we're going to, if any time in the next 365 years you do anything wrong, we're boxing those things up. Right? So when she comes home and she's bad, you promised. Don't make promises. Unless you're really going to be unmerited favor with these kids. Don't make promises. Because you know their behavior is never going to be up to par for you. There's times to discipline and there's times to be very graceful. And you can't overdo one or the other. You've got to find the balance, and the Spirit will tell you how to do that. Of course, not me and not a book. You understand what I'm saying? Every kid knows the difference between law and promise. But adults don't, and especially preachers. They mix them both together. And it's by promise. We're going to show you. Paul says the law is not of faith. And if the inheritance is by the law, this is all Galatians, Christ is nullified. His cross is worthless. So everything's by promise. Which means if it's by promise, all I can do is believe. Now, if you promise her a toy with no strings attached, she can do one or two things while you're gone for the next 2 hours. Bite her nails and worry that every T is crossed, every I is dotted, and is my room clean? You never asked. She could worry that you're going to renege on it, so she's going to make sure she does Ember's room. Clean her. I'm cleaning everybody's room. You never know. They might get me on a technicality. Or she can sit there and go, hey, I'm going to watch TV, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to kick the dog, I'm going to have fun. Huh? She promised. And it's not based on my behavior, it's based on her promising me this. And if you think promise is based on law, you've missed the whole gospel. So that's why I say, when you sin, oh, God's not going to heal me now. Oh my God. Well, if I do something, if I don't live exactly right, God's going to take it out of my hide somewhere. Folks, it's by promise. And all He requires is faith. None of your works. None of your works. Because if you go by works and go by the religion that's being preached today, you're just feeling all that. As a man thinks, so he is. If you think God's that way, that's how you're going to see Him, and that's how you're going to experience Him. Because be it unto you according to your faith. If you got no faith, then you're going to live a life that shows it's no faith. Does that make sense? Heavenly Father, Lord, You made this too good to be true. But we keep always going back to the tree to find something there, even if it's academics. Apart from You. Academics is worthless apart from You. And if those academics has got no life on it, that means we have somehow separated You from the academics. The Bible we can be apart from You, being all about the Bible. Seeing as a textbook. Anything. If you're not the one generating life out of the knowledge, generating life out of the experience, out of the whatever it is, if you're not the center of all that we are and do, that keeps us in the realm of faith, promise, grace, then we're going to fall from grace. Law will make sure, religion will make sure we fall from grace every single time. And your spirit will fill it because the well will run dry because of the garbage you're putting in there. And you from experiencing the life that's in Christ alone and nothing else. That's why He's your all in all. And that's why the just shall live by faith in Him, not by anything outwardly that we listen to, adhere to, work for. None of that. Let's just wait a few minutes here. It's too quick. Just slow down. Just slow down to the ministry of the Spirit this morning. Lord, what are You saying to us? Let Him speak to you right now. What is that one thing you're getting from Him right now? Maybe a few things. Let Him minister that to you. Don't rush out of here and let the devil take it, steal the seed that's been sown this morning. Let it get into your spirit. Let the Word of God richly dwell in your heart this morning. Let it go deep. Let it go deep. Let the worship team continue for a few minutes, and you stay in the presence of the Spirit right now, what He's saying and doing.